America turns 250 in 2026. 250 years. A number so large it almost stops feeling real, until you realize what it represents. A nation trying to remember its own origin story in public, on a massive stage, in front of the whole world. And most people think that's what this is about. A celebration, a birthday, fireworks, flags, parades, national pride. But the closer America gets to 2026, the more obvious it becomes. The biggest conflict around the 250th anniversary isn't about the celebration itself. It's about the story. Because when a nation celebrates, it has to choose what it remembers, and just as importantly, what it doesn't. That's why America 250 is not only a commemoration, it's a competition over narrative, a battle over which America gets framed as the real America. And right now, if you're paying attention, you can actually watch that battle unfolding in real time, in event announcements, in public-private initiatives, and in a growing fight over institutions that shape how history is taught and displayed. This is Vault of Revolution, and this episode is about a simple question that becomes more dangerous the closer we get to 2026. Who gets to tell the story of 1776? To understand why this matters, you have to understand what America 250 actually is. America 250 is promoted as a nonpartisan initiative connected to the United States Semi-Quincentennial Commission, a congressionally established commission meant to coordinate and encourage national participation in the 251st anniversary. The initiative describes itself as a multi-year effort leading up to July 4th, 2026, an attempt to engage Americans everywhere in a shared commemoration. You also have major federal messaging around 2026. The US Department of State has a Freedom 250 page, framing the anniversary as a major national moment. And there are additional government and public-private efforts that use Freedom 250 language as well, like the Department of the Interior's Freedom 250 initiative, which describes a public-private partnership and investment plans tied to iconic sites and national landmarks. On top of all that, the White House has a dedicated America 250 page describing a Task Force 250 and presenting an official video series called The Story of America, with language focused on renewing love of American history and highlighting national beauty and innovation. So you have a very powerful mix, a national milestone, multiple institutions, public-private partnerships, and a flood of content meant to shape how the anniversary is understood. And when the story becomes the product, everyone wants to be the editor. That's the context behind something that recently went viral in the US conversation about 2026, the Patriot Games. According to multiple reports, President Donald Trump announced a new national athletic competition called the Patriot Games as part of the 250th anniversary celebration plans. The concept described is a 4-day event featuring high school athletes, one young man and one young woman from each US state and territory, framed as a patriotic showcase tied to the semi-quincentennial. Now, if you're wondering why a sports announcement matters to a History Channel, here's why. Because it wasn't received as just sports. The Patriot Games became a viral topic because it carried an identity message. The announcement and surrounding commentary drew attention to how the event would be framed, who would be eligible, and what kind of patriotic symbolism it would represent. Supporters saw inspiration, young Americans, excellence, pride, a national moment. Critics compared it to dystopian entertainment, because when you stage competition as national symbolism, people start reading it as theater. And the moment it became theater, it became a story war. This is what's happening. America 250 is not just a calendar date, it's a narrative arena. And Patriot Games is one example of how quickly this anniversary can turn into a fight over what America is supposed to mean. But to really understand the stakes, you have to step away from sports and look at something far more important than any event: museums. Because in America, museums are not neutral storage rooms. They are story engines. Museums decide what counts as heritage. They decide what counts as achievement. They decide what counts as tragedy. They decide what gets a plaque, what gets a display, what gets a documentary, and what gets forgotten. And as 2026 approaches, one institution has become a flashpoint in the national conversation about history: the Smithsonian. In late 2025, reporting described escalating pressure from the White House on the Smithsonian Institution regarding content review, with warnings that federal funding could be withheld if the institution does not comply with an administration-backed review. This is not about one exhibit. The reporting describes requests for extensive internal material, things like indexes of exhibitions planned across multiple years, internal documents, and content processes tied to how museums plan and present programming. And why is that happening now? Because 2026 is not just a celebration, it's a deadline. It's a moment where the US story will be broadcast, replayed, and institutionalized. When a country hits 250 years, it does something psychologically powerful. It tries to compress a messy history into a neat identity, a simple origin story, a story children can memorize, a story leaders can celebrate, a story institutions can repeat. But history is never that clean. That's why this moment becomes so tense. The anniversary forces a choice. Do you tell the story as a victory parade, focused on unity, greatness, and national pride? Or do you tell the story as a complex human record, brilliant in some places, dark in others, full of contradictions? In the American mind, both impulses exist at the same time, and they clash hardest when the story is being told in official spaces. Here's what makes this especially volatile. Both sides believe they're defending the country. One argument says history and national institutions should unify Americans, not divide them. The anniversary should inspire pride, not guilt. Museums should avoid ideological framing and emphasize achievement. The other argument says when political power pressures museums, it risks turning history into propaganda. And sanitizing the past does not unify a nation. It weakens its ability to understand itself. This channel does not exist to take sides in a party war. It exists to document what's happening, to keep the tone calm, the language precise, and the story anchored in real public claims. So here's the core idea, without drama. As America approaches its 250th anniversary, the fight over history is accelerating. And it's accelerating because the story of America is becoming the prize. Now let's zoom out. Why does this happen in every country, in every era? Because national anniversaries are identity amplifiers. They magnify whatever a society is already struggling to agree on. In America, those struggles often orbit around the same questions. What does freedom mean? Who is included in the we of the founding story? Is the revolution remembered as pure heroism or as a complicated human event? Is the United States defined by its ideals or by its failures to fully live up to those ideals? This is why America 250 becomes a perfect storm. Because 1776 isn't a neutral year, it's a sacred symbol. And sacred symbols do not tolerate complexity easily. That's why so many anniversary projects trend toward simplification. They want a clean narrative arc: courage, sacrifice, victory, birth of a nation. But the real story of 1776 and the years around it is not clean. It contains courage and compromise in the same room. It contains aspiration and fear in the same sentence. It contains high ideals and ordinary human survival. So when someone says secrets buried since 1776, that doesn't have to mean conspiracies. It doesn't have to mean hidden cabals or fictional cover-ups. It can mean something more realistic. It can mean the truths that are inconvenient for a national myth, the truths that don't fit on a poster, the truths that don't sound good in a speech, the truths that, if you said them out loud during a celebration, might ruin the mood. Those are the secrets that get buried. Not always intentionally, often psychologically, because nations, like individuals, avoid the parts of their story that create discomfort. And if you want to see this clearly, watch how 2026 is being packaged. You have official and semi-official messaging asking citizens to renew their love of American history and participate in a story of the nation. You have national initiatives inviting Americans to pause and reflect on the past and honor contributions across the country. You have high-profile event proposals and patriotic programming being announced, including sports competitions, major spectacles, and landmark-style symbolism. You have public-private partnership language around investment in iconic sites and restoring national landmarks in connection with the anniversary. All of this is not inherently wrong. It can be inspiring, it can be meaningful, but it reveals something important. America 250 is not just a celebration of the past. It's a blueprint for how the past should be remembered. And once you see that, the story becomes clear. Every event is a narrative decision. Every statue is a narrative decision. Every museum exhibit is a narrative decision. Every school lesson is a narrative decision. The argument is not about whether America should celebrate 250 years. The argument is about what America is celebrating. So let's return to the Smithsonian moment. Why does a museum dispute become a national flashpoint? Because museums are where national identity becomes physical. A museum is where a country says, "This is who we are." And when a country reaches 250 years, the pressure on museums increases because they become central to the commemorative story. If you control the museum narrative, you influence how the anniversary is remembered long after 2026 ends. That's why requests for content review and threats around funding become so controversial. People interpret them as either accountability or control, depending on their perspective. But here's the deeper layer, the one most people miss. Even if political leaders never touched museums, narrative pressure would still exist. Because the pressure isn't only political, it's psychological, it's cultural. It's the pressure to make the story simple enough to function as identity. And in America, identity is not a small thing. Identity affects elections. Identity affects education. Identity affects what communities honor or reject. Identity affects whether people feel proud or alienated. That's why this is trending. Because America 250 forces identity questions into the open. And in that environment, even something like Patriot Games becomes a story battle. Because when you put the word patriot on an event, you are not just naming it. You are claiming ownership of a symbol. And symbols are power. Now, if you're watching this and you're wondering, what does Vault of Revolution actually stand for? Here's the answer. This channel stands for documented history. Not for myth, not for propaganda, not for internet conspiracies. Documented history. And documented history has a strange power. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to exaggerate. It only needs to be shown. Because reality is already intense enough. So here is the Vault question. The question that will define the next 18 months as America approaches 2026. What gets buried when a nation celebrates itself? What gets polished? What gets simplified? What gets removed because it complicates the message? What gets reduced to a footnote because it interrupts the myth? And here's the most important line of this entire episode. A confident nation does not fear complexity. A confident nation can hold pride and pain at the same time. The point of telling the truth about 1776 is not to weaken America. It's to strengthen America's ability to understand itself. Because if the story of America becomes a slogan, then history becomes marketing. And marketing is fragile. It can't survive real questions. But history can. History can survive the truth because history is the truth. Now, let's step forward into 2026. You're going to see an explosion of content around America 250. Videos, ceremonies, speeches, school projects, museum exhibits, public-private initiatives, athletic events, and major national storytelling campaigns. And each one will make a claim. Some claims will be explicit. Others will be quiet. Some will emphasize unity. Some will emphasize struggle. Some will emphasize achievement. Some will emphasize injustice. And the argument won't stop, because the argument is not just about the past. It's about the future version of the past. Because once you decide what 1776 means, you decide what America should be. That's why this channel exists. To look beneath the celebration, to look beneath the slogans, to look beneath the polished story, and to ask what was buried. Now, before we close, let's return to a single word you will hear constantly as 2026 approaches: freedom. It will appear in speeches, in websites, in initiatives, in promotional campaigns, in the name of programs and projects. But the most important question is older than any modern political argument. Freedom to do what? Freedom to speak? Freedom to remember? Freedom to define the story? And in the end, the story of 1776 is not only about independence. It's about ownership of narrative when the fireworks fade. Because fireworks last minutes. Narratives last generations. So as America approaches 250 years, remember this. The anniversary itself is not the point. The story is the point. And the most powerful stories are not the cleanest ones. They're the honest ones. They're the ones that admit history is complicated. They're the ones that accept the past without turning it into a weapon. They're the ones that don't need to erase anything to create pride. This is Vault of Revolution. If you want documented stories behind the American Revolution and the founding era, the stories that get simplified, the stories that get reduced, the stories that get buried, subscribe. Because history isn't always heroic. Sometimes it's negotiated. Sometimes it's curated. And sometimes it's buried.